Well, hello everyone. This is Johnny, and I want to talk a few minutes about something that's, I say, close to my heart, not because I've passed anything personal with this particular matter, but it resurrected again the reminder of my heart for this area, and we'll speaking of prison reform, judicial reform, and I was surprised. I didn't know it was in the works. I think it was Wednesday to hear that President Trump he was announcing, uh, new reform federal sentencing guidelines, and it was it was done. It was bipartisan, and even the people with him, it was black and white there, and so it was just it was a good visual as well, and a good picture uh, of what we want to see. Just the cooperation there, concern for an area of society that, again, we often will say from the white males and females, really, we're not known for caring that much. There's lip service, but not really that much about that area of society. We don't consider it something that affects us that directly. And Elizabeth and I, having pastored in Atlanta, Georgia for 15 years, and having a third of our church be minorities, approximately a third. And so we got to understand how things get processed through their perspective, through Hispanic process, through black, and I grew up in Peru, South America. I was born and raised there. My parents were missionaries there, so the first 18 years of my life were primarily that kind of experience. But so it was what President Trump announced. I think is something called the First Step Act, and it's the first major rewrite of the nation's criminal justice sentencing laws in a generation, and it's something that. Again, when you think the first rewrite of sentencing guidelines in a generation, it's long overdue. I think it probably doesn't go as far as it needs to, but it's a good start. It means there's attention being paid to it. And it gives judges more discretion when sentencing nonviolent offenders. And it reduces mandatory minimums, from 25 to 20 years, or from 20 to 15. And again, honestly, I don't think that is enough. It does now register powder cocaine, the same as crack cocaine, as and the scale of sentencing and the punishment associated with it. Again, if you think beyond just me saying that, powder cocaine has often been associated with something that happens more in the white community, and crack cocaine is something more in the black community, and so sentencing has been much more rigorous for the crack cocaine, and there's really no justifiable reason for it. I was excited to hear that it was actually President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, that was recognized as he who was heavily behind the write-up of it, wording it all, and I know he worked in conjunction with Senator Grassley. Is that his name? Let's see if I have that written here somewhere. Senator Grassley, who is a Republican, and Senator Durbin, who's Democrat. So it was great to see the bipartisan effort there as well. And again, there is some of it is trying to, in some way, slightly undo. There was a 1994 legislation where President Bill Clinton signed a bill that disproportionately hurt African American families and community. I mean, those are the words even from President Trump. And so, because of that, this thing, the First Step Act that was announced on Wednesday, is backed. ACLU backs it. Again, it's very rare to have all sides backing it, and it really is something that is very important. It's very important in the eyes of God. I wrote about it in my book. Seven Mountain Renaissance Vision and Strategy through 2050. I'll show you that in case you haven't seen it before. in a chapter on the mountain of government. I write as one of the high priorities moving forward, and that God's going to really give us fresh ideas for, but we got to get his heart for it, is renaissance in the prison system. And that this will be something that's a priority on God's heart. And, part of his heart for the mountain of government has everything to do with jails, prisons, punishment, and rehabilitation. And many of you remember Matthew 25, particularly verses 32 through 46. It talks about how God will separate the separation of sheep and goat nations. And whatever all that means, there was, the separating note was, you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. And so he specifically goes into those who cared for those who were in prison. You visited those who were in prison. And so, again, a determinant for a nation being accepted or rejected is a matter of how he cares for those in prison. And in the scripture, Jesus himself identified with those, you did it to me, with those who are in prison. And I think we should strongly heed this consideration and seek to receive his heart for reforming society. Again, it's not to take pot shots at just the whites or the white male and female, but it's so easy when we feel like we have the self-righteous number one, the issue of abortion. We put all our even funding, energy, messaging behind there, and we think we've got it all covered, and we got the heart of God priority covered there, and we really need to embrace a wider perspective, a humility regarding that as valuable and as correct that we are in our perception that life has to be valued in the womb. We can't do that at the expense of life after birth, after it's been born. We have to, the same passion we have for an unborn child has to be maintained. We can't at some point say, well, it's their fault. There are moments when it is their fault, but it's somehow our compassion seems to just drop off the table, fall off a cliff once a child is born, and it goes beyond this particular issue. We don't have a passion for the fact that there are 300,000 Latino kids in America that go to sleep every night without one or both of their parents because one or both of them has been summarily deported with no process of any sort. And this is by and large unknown in the white evangelical community because it's not a priority. We don't need to prioritize that because once, it's all about abortion. That's the only thing. We're avoiding judgment if we get the abortion matter taken care of, and we're engendering judgment if we mess up on that. And yet the scriptures, and this is not to say something I'm not saying, but abortion and infanticide were highly practiced in Jesus' day, but the example of Matthew 25 is specifically about prison and prisoners, and there's something about his heart for there, and so we want to understand that his heart is close to the in prison, no matter what the offense or failure. The assumption is they did do something wrong. So when he says, he didn't say, go find out who really is there and it was unjust. It was just visit them. And it's a way of manifesting the care of our Father for those type of people. Ultimately, I believe the Lord showed me that a way a nation treats its prisoners is ultimately an indicator of the quality of the basic human rights of that nation. If you want to understand, how to scale the human rights of a certain nation, you'll look at the prison system, and that really reveals the heart of a society. And do we like, throwing the book at people, locking them up forever, and that's our way, is like, yes, lock them up and ignore them forever. That has nothing to do with the heart of our Lord, and we really need to be aware. And so often we forget that 90-something% of them, 99% perhaps, are going to be released again into society. And so it's the equivalent of locking somebody up with a cold and then releasing them with full-blown pneumonia or something, because you don't get better in our system, particularly when it's only processed through the grid of proper punishment. We got justice needs to come to them. They need to be punished. Well, this particularly affects the black community, has historically. And you have the inner city black communities, and again, there's a lot of middle class and better black communities now. But if you go to the inner city communities, there's the backwash of prisons that operate there. It's already, the last numbers I saw, despite we have such an improvement on unemployment right now, but as of before President Trump was in, I know the unemployment rate for men, for young men, I think up to age 35 in the black community was about 50%. And if you're born a black boy, you're going to have basic discrimination. You're going to be the least likely to be employed. That's just what the numbers bear out right now. So if you're a young man, and we ran across it, we had them in our church. You can have been, you can be 18, 19, 20, and you can have been a perfect young man, and you're going to be looked at in a way that's different than everybody else because of being a young black male. And so it's the most discriminated against. By that, I mean prejudged. You're the most prejudged member of society. And so then there's 50% unemployment. Well, what do you do when there's unemployment and there's not enough jobs in your community? You have to make a living in some way. And so the alternative economy kicks in. And the alternative economy is always, it's illegal. And the first job of choice is drug trade and drugs and selling drugs, and then other illicit things, whether it's, sex and all that. And so we go, yeah, why there's so much crime? Well, they have to make money somehow. And when we don't provide proper alternatives, then that is a way they can go. It takes amazing spiritual fortitude and resistance in order not to go that way. And so if you're already the number one discriminated against, and then you have these tough laws, like, again, the law that Bill Clinton signed in 1994, designed to make sure you're caught if you're doing something in the black community, running with this alternative economy, then you go into prison, whatever it is, a few months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, and once you come out, if it was hard for you to be hired when your record was spotless, then it's off the charts difficult for you to have any hireability after the fact. And so that's just, it's not just, it's not right. So we are condemning them essentially to that kind of hopeless perspective of a future. And you're like, well, if they were really, and if you're going to follow that up, if they're really person of character, how do you become a person of character that grows up in a community that's often fatherless? And yeah, that's the problem, fatherlessness. Well, the problem of fatherlessness is that you want them to claim. You're saying, yeah, why don't they claim their kids? Well, when you're having your first kid at 14 or 15 because you didn't have a father in a practical way yourself, then you're not wanting 14 or 15-year-olds to take ownership of the children they have. They're not capable of doing that. We need different dynamics to take place. And again, I know it gets complicated. I step on people's toes. Particularly when I'm having this conversation, I step on, we have white, the white evangelicals. There's easy, trite answers we have all the time. And so we're not really willing to be a part of the solution. And we really have to. And we have to understand there is systemic racism. And it may not be an actual person thinking a racist thought, but there are laws. Again, it was a systemic racist bill that Bill Clinton signed, and he probably wasn't thinking anti-black when he was doing it. But anytime you're going to crack down on crime and you need better numbers, the easiest place to get those numbers checked off is to go to the black community and go against the drug trade, because that is the alternative economy functioning in a place that is that doesn't have enough jobs for everyone. And then when you do the 3 strikes you're out element of it, so someone can get caught with relatively minor amount of marijuana 3 times, and then they're going to be for life. That's not fair. And even if they don't get the life matter, they go into prison 5, 10, 15 years, depending on what the charge is. And it's a felony offense, and they can't vote forever. And so this is a reality, the inner city communities, and you have juries that are formed, and only those who don't have felonies on the record can perform in those, can be in those juries. And so then you're actually not even allowed to be, you're not even be judged by the standards of your community, because there is this the system is again, I hate to use the word rigged, but it's definitely it's leaning heavily against you. And I know the Lord really wants us to care about rehabilitation and not just punishment. And it's the heart of the Lord to rehabilitate. He rehabilitates all of us, not just punishes us. We all make mistakes. We all love the forgiveness button. And so, yes, to the degree there is a heavy offense, there needs to be a proper restriction, some level of punishment. But they're called rehabilitation centers for a reason. They're supposed to rehabilitate. And the truth is, the way we presently run our prisons is they don't rehabilitate. They make it worse. They make it worse for a person in every kind of way, from getting a job to the emotional damage. There's not proper care over their protection in prison. And so there's assaults that take place, sexual assaults, and there's a way. It wouldn't be that complicated to set up systems where not everybody's forced to go into showers at the same time, for instance. There's practical stuff. That's where systemic racism comes in. And it's not, again, some of this is not just race. It is just how we mistreat our prison population in general. And I know for those who do have your white family members or Hispanic, this is the truth and the reality for them as well. I address it with the black community because there's a disproportionate percentage of the prison population. I believe there's 1 million out of 18, 1,000,008, almost 2 million in prison. There's a high percentage of blacks that are in there, and so many, a high percentage of them are for relatively minor drug infractions, nonviolent buying and selling drugs, and it's just it's not right. And I'm not covering all the bases. I just started talking about what I appreciate about President Trump and what he signed, and that it was a bipartisan effort. I did want to tell you, I think from a book, for instance, I did my own study on it, and the reason the African American families, the black families, while they'll vote into in political positions, those who at least say they care about this aspect of their life. Again, I feel like often the Democrats have promised to care, but they really haven't. But the Republicans haven't even acknowledged in time past that there is a compassion or caring gene towards that at all, towards the realities they face. And we found out that pretty much every family, every black family in our church, and there were great families, but either somebody in their family or they knew somebody who was interacting with the legal system. And according to today's societal trends, 1 in 3 black males born today are likely to be in prison at some point in their lives. And a lot of that's not just because they're criminally wired. Again, nobody's criminally wired, but there are societal realities. And again, go back to just the matter I'm telling you, the unhireability you're born under, and then you get a minor drug infraction on your record, and then what that turns to. But for instance, here's one thing. There are 5 times as many whites using drugs as African Americans. Again, we're more the people. 5 times as many, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of whites. African Americans represent 12% of the total population of drug users, but 38% of those arrested for drug offenses, and 59 of those in state prison for a drug offense. And you see that there's a lot of, again, where it comes out where it's not personal racism in the way we process it, but there literally is an availability to buy mercy in our justice system. We could say buy mercy, twist it in some way by having, you have a lawyer who can get you off, and so reduce sentences. You compare an 18-year-old black man arrested for a minor drug charge, an 18-year-old white. I know it can go bad both ways, but I saw the numbers on it, and there's just no comparison. It's not a little bit of discrepancy. There is much more serious sentencing taking place against those who are from the black community. And I know it's increased for the Hispanic. It's somewhere in between the white and the black. And again, back to anytime a candidate says he's going to be tough on crime, it usually it's almost always a reference and then a follow-up if he is elected. He goes after black neighborhood crime, and you don't see you don't see the upper middle class whites there being more surveillance of their parties and their drug activity, whatever. So the unemployment rate for young black males is about 3 times higher than the average rate. And, I've covered it, and I really didn't cover it. There's so much more, and I didn't really even mean to do as much as I have. But I was just really excited about that measure, and I knew I had some friends, black leaders, that had mentioned they'd had good discussions with President Trump, and he did really have a heart for it, and I'm glad to see that. And I just want to, just speak to us, whoever considers themselves a believer or Christian, just to be reminded that that this falls in line with the heart of God, and this is a major issue and need for attention as we think Reformation, Seven Mountains, and all that. And back to comparing with the abortion and the overturn of Roe versus Wade, should it ever be done again, to the degree that the Roe versus Wade being overturned is not agreed upon by the populace, it is not going to matter that much. They'll take a trip, they'll cross borders, they'll go to another nation, they'll do so illegitimately. And as we know, we have all kinds of laws against drunkenness. It doesn't really stop it. We have all kinds of laws against drug use. It doesn't really stop it. When it's not in the heart of people to do so, it's good. It's still good to have a good law, but a good law does not necessarily change a reality. And so we have that's just something to be aware of as we're fighting that battle. But this other one really is a quality of life matter, and again, it's really something that has set back the black community, and sometimes we're not aware of it because we say, again, I say us, the white community, we're like, hey, well, there's no more fountains that say black on one side or colored, white on the other, and we're nobody's going to the back of the bus, and we had a president who was black, and those things are true, but it just as in the announcement of this new First Step Act, this is the first major rewrite of a nation's criminal justice sentencing laws in a generation. It tells you that if we haven't changed the laws, the sentencing laws in a generation, that we haven't been making progress. And again, it's not about being easy on crime, but how can we have people, we literally have thousands and thousands of young, it's black males, it's white male, females as well. It's people of all races. Again, it's just disproportionately black that are in prison for an offense that's now legal in many states. So anyway, God's going to help us, and so good to see this advance here, and hopefully those of you from the black community, it's encouraging to see there's be some attempt some understanding of some core matters that need to be addressed. Anyway, this is right before Thanksgiving, so I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving time. Enjoy your families and find the lovable thing to look at in your families. And there's always the hateful things to be reminded of, but look for the parts of a person that are enjoyable. Know people after the spirit, not after the flesh. Great talking with you, and look forward to doing this again.